right, let's bring in Stephen Miller for just that, White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor. Thank you very much, Stephen. Good to have you on the program here. So what can you add to what we just heard?
Well, I think it's important to put everything in context first. When President Trump left office in 2020, we had peace in the Middle East, we had stability, relations were being normalized, more and more countries were being added to the Abraham Accords, and it was also peaceful and quiet with Israel and Gaza. 4 years later, of course, we have had catastrophe, we've had bloodbath, we've had chaos, we have Iran on the march to a nuclear weapon, funding proxies all across the region that are spreading terror and death, including, of course, the catastrophe and the tragedy on October 7th in Israel. President Trump is now proposing bold and necessary solutions to solve what has been previously an unsolvable problem. This has not worked. And what President Trump is saying is you could spend $100 billion rebuilding the rubble of Gaza, put everybody back in where they were before. Hamas will reconstitute. Hamas will attack Israel again. It will be reduced to rubble again. And what will do this every 5 years forever? Clearly that has never worked. Clearly that will never work. So he's talking about creating an international cooperative effort to turn the Gaza Strip into a center of commerce and opportunity, and then to work with partners around the region, including Jordan, including Egypt, to resettle some of the 2 million individuals who are living in the Gaza Strip so that it can be a place of peace and prosperity. And this is exactly the plan that is necessary in order to achieve the peace that we've all been searching and hoping for.
In that discussion in the Oval Office, King Abdullah was asked several times, does he agree with President Trump's plan to take over Gaza and resettle the Palestinians? He kept on deferring, saying, we're going to have conversations with Egypt and other partners in the region. The president was asked about the Egyptian plan. He seemed to indicate that he knows the basic framework of it, if not more, and that he likes it and that the Palestinians will like it. So can you tell us what the Egyptian plan is?
No, I can't get ahead. I would love to, John. And by the way, it's great to be on air with you again, John. It's been a while, and I salute, by the way, how well you've been doing, and I really am glad to talk to you today. The president has been clear about the cooperation with Egypt. I don't want to get ahead of him on that announcement, but I think the important point here is that Egypt recognizes we've been a long-standing partner of Egypt. We have a long-standing military alliance. We are close with the Sisi government. There is a framework for cooperation that serves both of our countries and broader stability in the region. I understand the number of 2 million refugees sounds large in Gaza, but look, to put it in our own perspective here in America, what? Joe Biden brought in 15 to 20 million people over a 4-year time period into just one country. You're talking about a population that could be resettled across multiple different countries in the region that could have access for the first time in their lives to security, stable housing, stable income, healthcare, medicine, stable food supply. This would be transformative for the region. It would be transformative for the Gaza population, and it would end and disrupt the cycle of heartbreaking violence. John, you know I'm right when I say if you return to the status quo, it'll be 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, there will be another attack. Gaza will be reduced to rubble again. More people will die, more children will get hurt, and we'll be back exactly where we started. That can't continue. That's the president's fundamental point.
I would think that there's a pretty good argument for that position, that if you return to the status quo, this will happen over and over again.
Yeah. Stephen, if we could, we were able to cut the president from just a moment ago detailing his plans on Gaza. This is Sat 2, guys.
We're not going to buy anything. We're going to have it, and we're going to keep it, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be peace, and there's not going to be any problem, and nobody's going to question it. And we're going to run it very properly, and eventually we'll have economic development at a very large scale, maybe the largest scale on that site.
So you and the president are laying out some pretty significant plans here. What speed bumps do you imagine you'll encounter?
Well, I want to be very clear. The president's laying out the plans. I'm just honored to be able to be here today to talk with you about the president's transformative plans for the region. Sometimes when you have a problem that's been stuck in concrete for generations, you have to stop tinkering around the edges, and you have to change the whole entire paradigm. That's what the president is proposing here. This is a incredibly valuable piece of property in terms of being along the beachfront, in terms of having tremendous economic potential, in terms of having tremendous development potential. For the region, if you were to turn this into an oasis of economic opportunity where people could live and work and be free and happy and never have Hamas ever again, that would be so beautiful for the region and for the world. Like, you have people of Palestinian descent who are currently right now living in Jordan, living in other countries around the region. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't continue to pursue that resettlement in a way that brings dignity to refugees so that then the region can be developed economically. And then we can talk, once it's been developed by other partner nations, about what kind of residency situation could exist there. But the key point is that first, you have to end what has clearly been broken and has never worked and never will work. And everyone recognizes that. We'd all love to be able to turn back the clock and go back to 2020 when President Trump was in office. But the world has changed. October 7th changed everything. And the treatment of these prisoners who are tortured, sexually mutilated, debased day after day by Hamas shows this will never work. The current situation will never succeed. And by the way, the population of Gaza are prisoners of Hamas. You know, people can debate endlessly about what percentage of support Hamas does or doesn't have with the population. That's almost aside from the point. They're prisoners of Hamas. They are subjects of Hamas. They cannot live in a situation into the future where if you step out of line, you and your family get murdered and killed. They cannot live in a place that is governed only by violence and hatred. President Trump is saying, let's change the whole picture of the region. You've seen other parts of the Middle East that have turned into incredible zones of economic opportunity with the right governance and the right approach. This can be done here. And the people who are afraid of trying something new or trying something different are locked in to a system that has only ever produced failure and heartbreak. How many years, John, have you had the same conversation? Your whole career. How many breaking news segments, John, have you had during your storied career about bloodshed and massacre in that region? How many times? At what point do we say we have to change the whole equation? That's what President Trump is talking about.
You know, and to your point, Stephen, we were showing pictures of the Jabalia refugee camp on the right-hand side of our screen as you were talking, and you wonder how anybody could ever return to that because there literally is nothing left. And part of the equation is that in order to get rid of Hamas, you've got to do something about Iran, which are their benefactors.
Yes.
And what do you do about that? But I want to ask you about the Saturday deadline, because here's what the president said a moment ago about that.
A deadline, and I don't think they're going to make the deadline personally. I think they want to play tough guy, but we'll see how tough they are. But it's going to be a wonderful thing. It's going to be wonderful for the Middle East. I think it'll turn the Middle East. I think you're going to have peace in the Middle East.
All right, so at the end there, he did come back to his plan for Gaza, but let me come back to the Saturday deadline. The president has said if they don't make the Saturday deadline, if all the remaining hostages are not released, all hell will break loose, all bets are off. What in practical terms does that mean?
Well, I think for one thing, it's a statement to the government of Israel that if the hostages are not returned in full, that Israel will not be restrained by the United States in its response. So at a fundamental level, it's the president saying to Israel that you can do what you have to do if that deadline isn't met. As the president has said in his remarks yesterday, as I know that you heard, Israel obviously has the ability, if they want to make their own decision as a sovereign country about how they want to handle it. But the president is saying, not only saying, but part of what he's saying is that Israel can do what it needs to do in such a circumstance. I obviously wouldn't telegraph any moves beyond that because, as you know, the president is very clear. We do not telegraph our moves under President Trump. But the threat and the warning is as real and as severe and as dire as it gets. He is done with watching our fellow, both you have Americans in captivity as well as our friends in Israel in captivity being tortured to death. Enough is enough. Yeah. Free all the hostages or pay the price, because this country is not going to tolerate terrorists torturing and murdering American citizens as well as our allies and friends in Israel. It has to stop. There has to be a deadline, and we're not messing around, and this president is not messing around.
Stephen, just before you go, and I'll warn you, we're up against a hard break here at 21. Has Israel told the United States, told the president how they will act if they do not meet that deadline Saturday?
I have no news on that front, but I think the bottom line message to Hamas and to the world is that the United States of America is not going to let terrorists run the world. We are not going to let these organizations dictate to great powers what happens and when. You kidnap and murder American citizens, you kidnap and murder our friends, there will be consequences, prices will be paid. October 7th was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, and as President Trump has said, we are reminded of the Holocaust when we see these emaciated bodies leaving custody as their captors laugh at their suffering and pain. This is not the path to success and peace in the Middle East. Success and peace in the Middle East is a future where Hamas can no longer threaten anyone.
All right. Well, we'll see if the region can put a plan together. Stephen, thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you.
Good to see
Always.
you.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you again as well, and thanks for your kind words. Appreciate it.